All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Kabbalah Café. This is, without a doubt, the best breakfast in Atlanta, right? This is amazing.
Almost
This is amazing.
better than Israel.
Almost better than
Almost.
Israel. That's it. So what you're saying is, Jeff, that this may be the best, I don't know if we should qualify, but let's qualify, the best kosher breakfast in the world. You're saying it may be the best kosher breakfast in the world right here on Sunday mornings. So I'm excited to be here with you. We've actually not had class for a few weeks. I was out of town, and then we had Purim last week. So, there's a lot of stuff going on, but we are back, and I am very excited about today's class because today's topic is called spiritual nihilism. Now, nihilism is not like the philosophy of Egypt vis-a-vis the Nile River. All right. Wow.
Oh.
Wow. What a way to get this. What a way to get this started. Right off the deep end. Okay. They say that we're coming up to Passover soon in a few weeks. Like three and a half weeks. Huh? 3 weeks. Right? 3 weeks from tomorrow night. They say that Pharaoh was in denial. All right.
He was actually in denial.
In denial. Right. Yes, he was in denial. Every morning. Yeah, by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but according to the Midrash, Pharaoh, because he called himself a god, so he told everyone that he never needed to use the bathroom. So what he did was, instead, he used to bathe in the Nile River, and I use air quotes, but that's when he also whatever. So that way he remained the eyes etc. Fine. So that's that. But today's topic is not about that. Spiritual nihilism, and this is going to be a powerful topic because we're going to talk about a lot of things, including the evolution of Jewish thought and a misunderstanding that really changed the course of history in a dramatic way. So what I want to do actually is pass around another. I know that our Kabbalistic text was passed around, but I prepared a supplementary text that I want to start off with. So please, actually, let me give you a few of these copies. Please take and ask.
Two
Thank you very much.
today?
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff. We got a lot of stuff to cover. Okay, so here, Norm, this is you. And then, of course, I'm going to pull this up for our online group. Hey, Sandrine. Boker Tov, good to see you. It's been a while, right? It's been a while. Oh, and by the way, I do want to mention that today we're dedicating the class to the Refuah Shalema, to the health and healing of Ray Bellman. Do we know Ray's name again? Rachel Leah Bas Chaya Ruth. She should have a Refuah Shlema, a speedy recovery. And she's in the hospital right now. She's St. Joe's. She should have a speedy recovery and only good health. Okay, so here's what we got. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start like this. The text that we're going to study right now is called Pirkei Avot. Some of you are familiar, I imagine, are familiar with this. Maybe many of you are familiar with this. This is basically a section of the Mishnah that is and what's the Mishnah? Let me just back up for a second. The Mishnah is the first emergence of the oral Torah in writing that appeared about 18 or 1900 years ago. It was composed by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince. And what he did was he compiled the oral law, the oral tradition, and wrote it down in very concise, very organized, systematic fashion. And that is what is the Mishnah. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now, that is what we call the Mishnah. And what happened here? Okay. There are 63 tractates of Mishnah. 63. Of the 63, 62 are legalistic by nature. In other words, 62 of the tractates will tell you what you have to do and what you don't, and what you can't do. In other words, what's permitted, what's forbidden in accordance with Jewish law. However, one tractate of 63, which is the one that we're going to open up right now, so that tractate tells you not what you have to do, but what you ought to do. We call this Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, beyond the letter of the law. So 62 tractates will tell you the do's and don'ts of Judaism. One tractate will tell you how to be a mensch, how to be ethical. That's why we call it, and this is called Pirkei Avot, ethics of the fathers. It's ethics. By the way, the Hebrew word Pirkei doesn't mean ethics. What does it mean? What's the literal meaning of Pirkei?
Sentence or saying?
Verses or passages or teachings, maybe, right? How would you translate it? Passage, right? Anecdotes of the sages that perhaps, right? Parak is a chapter, passage, section, teachings, whatever. But we don't call in English. We don't call it teachings of the fathers, ethics of the fathers. Why? Because the nature of this is lifnim mishrat hadin, is beyond the letter of the law. So now let's jump in and let's take a look. What I've selected here are the first three mishnahs, the first three sections of the first chapter. There are 5 or 6 chapters, depending on who you ask, of Pirkei Avot, and we're going to quote now the first 3 passages of that. All right, so I'll begin by reading the text. Reward. Okay, here we go. The Pirkei Avot begins. Everyone has a copy? Yes, it looks like this. Okay, Pirkei Avot begins like this. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and gave it over to Joshua. Now, we know this, right? Moses gets the Torah at Sinai, gives it to Joshua. Joshua gave it over to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets gave it over to the men of the great assembly. I'm going to explain all this in a second. They, the men of the great assembly, would always say these 3 things: be cautious in judgment, establish many pupils, and make a safe defense around the Torah. Now, let's break this down before we go further, because that is the first Mishnah of the first chapter, chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Let's break it down. The first thing it does, and I believe it is very special that it does this. The first thing that it does is it traces the lineage of Torah thought. It says, where does this thing called Judaism, where does this thing called Torah, where does it come from? And the answer is, it comes from Sinai. Comes from Sinai. And then from Sinai, we trace it. It's not like it comes from Sinai, anonymous source. You know that, what is that religion that has the guy found gold plates somewhere? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Was it Mormon? Is that?
No, that's not Mormon.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe.
Back to New York, they found. Yeah.
Is that more?
It started as, I don't call it religion.
Well, whatever. Right. This okay.
It's the Mormons.
Mormons. Okay.
Joseph Smith found the tablets, and you had to have special glasses to read them, etc.
Got it. Okay. All right.
It's trick X-ray glasses.
It's trick extra. Right. Okay. Fine. So here's the deal. Here we have names and dates. I mean, almost right. We have Moses. We have Joshua. We have the elders, the prophets, and we know these people. We know their names. We know who they are. There are books written about them. Everything is documented. Torah, what's fascinating about Torah is it's an unbroken documentation. It's not like there are any gaps in the story. It's like, well, there's an origin story that happened like 3,000 years ago. We have no idea what happened to it since, and then it reemerged, 25 years ago. Every generation, they were doing the same thing. In other words, unbroken chain, an unbroken chain of, is the right word, custody? Chain of custody or chain of transmission? Chain of transmission. So again, we have Moses, Joshua, the elders, the prophets. We know who the prophets were. They got books written after them, named after them. And the men of the great assembly. By the way, who were the men of the great assembly? Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, huh? Not well, sort of, but not exactly. The men of the great assembly. The men of the great assembly were individuals who lived, one second, they lived at the beginning of the Second Temple era. 120 great sages and scholars, including some names that I guarantee that you know. You ready for this? There were 120 great prophets and sages at the beginning of the Second Temple era, including Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Zerubbabel. You ready for the next one? Ready for the name drop? Mordecai. You guys know Mordecai?
Yeah.
From the Purim story? He was one of the 120. He made the cut. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These are some of the great, and some of them have books written after, named after them.
Wasn't Norm one of them?
But I was a kid.
Norm.
Norm the Great.
Don't listen to this guy. All right. So here's the deal. We have some of the great leaders of all time that were part of the Men of the Great Assembly. Now, what did the Men of the Great Assembly do? What did the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, what did they do? So what they did was they canonized, which would be the official books of scripture, the 24 books that we know, called Tanakh, the books of scripture. They set those, they established those. They fixed the daily prayer liturgy. So the Siddur that we have, the prayer book, they were the ones that, again, can't fix that. And they established the text for the Kiddush Friday night, for the Havdalah Saturday night, and many basic Jewish practices. They were the ones that fixed those practices. So just so you know, they were...
But this was a precursor to the Sanhedrin.
No, not necessarily precursor. This was maybe parallel to that. The Sanhedrin did not have 120 judges. It had far few, depending on if it was the big Sanhedrin, the small Sanhedrin, either 23 judges or 70 judges. All right, that's how it worked. Now, let's jump back inside. So the first Mishnah tells us the chain of transmission of Torah: Moses, Joshua, elders, prophets, Men of the Great Assembly. Oh, and then they said three things. So here we have the first teaching, right? What are the teachings? Number one, three things. Be cautious in judgment. You know what that means? That means don't rush to judge. Be careful when you judge. Be careful when you assume. Be careful when you ascribe intent. Be careful in judgment. By the way, we're going to see that this comes up very important in what we're about to lead into. So that's statement number one. It's kind of like dropping a clue for what's about to unfold. Be cautious in judgment. Number two, establish many pupils. Remember, this was at a time before the oral Torah was written down, which means all you had was the written Torah, and everything else needed to be committed to memory. So the more students you had, the more likely it was that Torah would have continuity. Remember, it's so weird to think about a time before, I don't know, hard drives, or before even the printed word, printed books, and even any written text of the oral Torah, which is the elaboration and the explanation of all the things that's written in the written Torah. So before that's all written down, you need to have students that are committing it to memory and transmitting it. Let's continue. And the third thing is make a safety fence around the Torah, and that is the idea, once again, to safeguard the integrity of Torah. Sometimes you need to kind of take a step back and make sure that the core values and teachings of Torah are preserved by creating a safety fence. This would refer to like rabbinic ordinances that kind of keep us away from violating Torah law, which we can get into another time as to what those are. All right, but let's continue. Second Mishnah. Let's roll on the next paragraph. Shimon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, was among the last surviving members of the Great Assembly. He would say, the world stands on three things: Torah, service of God, and deeds of kindness. All right, so that's what he says. The world stands on three pillars: Torah, Avoda, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, service of God, which service of God either means like personally serving God, or it can mean prayer. And deeds of kindness, of course, are acts of kindness, chesed, helping each other out, etc. All right, that is that. Now, who was Shimon the righteous? Shimon HaTzadik was, as we saw, among the last surviving members of the Great Assembly. He was also a Kohen Gadol. You know what a Kohen Gadol is? The high priest, or as I like to call him, the big kahuna. See what I did there? Right, Kohen Gadol. Right, the Kohen Gadol, and he served as Kohen Gadol for 40 years in the Second Temple era. So he was a long-standing Kohen Gadol. Now, you may know this, that at the end of the Second Temple era, the position of the Kohen Gadol was extremely corrupted. You guys know this? Mm-hmm. To the point that people would pay their way to get into the high priesthood. Mm-hmm. And the highlight of being a high priest would be on Yom Kippur, going to the Holy of Holies. So yeah, I think you know where I'm going with this, right? So, but only someone who's worthy of being in the Holy of Holies would be able to survive that holy experience, which means
A lot of them would
that
die.
every year they would need a new Kohen Gadol, and people would still pay for it. Very high rate of turnover, annual basis. So the Talmud says that the way they would do it is they would tie a string, tie a rope. I'm sure you've heard this, right? They tie a rope to the Kohen Gadol, I guess around his waist or something.
Around his neck.
No, well,
No, because he.
that's way too morbid. Huh?
Yet sin.
Right, he hasn't yet. Well, again, but if he wasn't worthy, he would go in and again, what's the rationale? To just experience the holiness of the Holy of Holies. For some was worth it. That one experience was worth it, even though they knew they weren't going to make it out alive. I mean, that high. So the Rebbe actually says, if we want to look at it positively, obviously corruption is not good, but if you want to look at it positively, here you have people that are willing to give their life to see God, as it were, to behold the divine. Again, ends don't justify means and such.
Didn't they also have idols in there at the end?
No.
Not in the Holy of Holies,
Not in
but
the
the
Holy
base of Mikdash.
I don't know. That's already the Hanukkah story. That's where the Greeks put in idols and they sacrificed pigs. No, there were times, to your point,
It was a bad time towards the end.
it was. To your point, there were times. So skeptical about Zoom nowadays. So skeptical. Someone's.
Who you let in.
Well, there's Minnie Mouse too. I don't know about Minnie Mouse too. I don't know, but I'm not looking to get surprised again. Fool me once, right? Huh? Right, exactly. Yes, right. So the Kohen Gadol. So what they would do is, after the Kohen Gadol was in there for a little while and didn't come out, they would tug on the rope a little bit, and if there was no tug back,
There was a pull.
they pulled him out. Why did but Shimon HaTzadik, he's called Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous. He was not a bad guy. He was a good guy, and
That's why they called him the righteous.
that's why it's called the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik. And he served for 40 years in the Beis HaMikdash, and he said 3 things: the world stands on Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, Torah, service of God, and deeds of kindness. So that is that. Yes.
So when the Mishnah, when these guys mention the the lineage, they don't say Aaron, they say Joshua. So Aaron is
Yes.
elders. Is Aaron mentioned in the Torah? Because I know our tradition is that Moses taught it to Aaron, who taught it to the 70 elders, who taught it to. So Aaron.
You are 100% correct. The reason why Aaron is not mentioned is because the Mishnah is charting the progression of Torah down through the generations, and Aaron would be the parallel generation to Moses. So although it mentions Joshua, who was also at that time, but he was the successor of Moses, so thus he represents the next generation. Aaron would be, you're right, when Moses came down the mountain, he would teach Aaron first, his brother, and then Joshua, and then the elders. You're right. But the way it's here is that it's going down through the generations, which means that when we're quoting, when we're referencing Moses, Joshua, and elders, these are elders of the next subsequent generations, and this is how it moves, and then the prophets, and that's how this moves forward into the Torah Judaism that we know. Now let's continue one more, and then we're gonna put this all together. Give me a quick second. All right, here we go. Antignos. Oh, okay. Here we go. This is gonna be the critical one. This is the third Mishnah, chapter 1, third Mishnah. Antignos of Socho. Just so you know, his name was Antignos. His name. Socho was his name. Wasn't there an Olympics in Sochi?
In Japan.
In Japan.
In Soho and
I went to.
And Soho's New York.
I went to.
None of these are that.
I went to Antignos on one of my honeymoons. Oh, it's Antigua.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Okay. I wasn't even sure. Antignos of Socho. Here we go. Received the tradition from Shimon the righteous. In other words, here the Mishnah is literally tracing by name. We were a little bit general before Moses, Joshua, but then elders, prophets, men of the great assembly. Then we focused down general onto Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous. And now we have Antignos was the disciple of Shimon HaTzadik. He would say, Antignos would say, listen to this. 3 things in general, seems like these sages had like 3 things that they would say. Like, here are the top 3 things. Here we go, 3 things. Number 1, do not be as slaves who serve their master. Oh, actually, it's 2 things. All right, my bad. Do not be, well, maybe it's 3 things. Do not be as slaves who serve their master for the sake of reward. Rather, be as slaves who serve their master not for the sake of reward.
Be a better slave.
Okay? Right? And the 3rd sentence, and the fear of heaven should be upon you. Al tiyu ka'avadim hameshamshim es harav al menas l'kabel pras. Don't be like the slaves, servants that serve their master for the reward. Rather, be as the servant who serves the master, not for the sake of reward. That line led to one of the greatest splits in Jewish history. Here we go. He had amongst his students were 2 individuals. Their names were Tzadok and Baitus. Tzadok and Baitus. Just so you know, the 3 names that are at play right now is Antignos, the teacher, Tzadok, student 1, Baitus, student number 2. Listen to what happens next. These 2 students take their teacher's teaching and they corrupt it. They say, you know what Antignos meant? He meant that there's no purpose in any of this. There's no reward. He just said, don't be as a slave who serves for reward. There's no reward. That's how they heard it. There's no reward. In other words, they believed from what they heard their teacher, what they believed that they heard their teacher say, is that all of this is purposeless, pointless. There's no point. There's no reward. There's no punishment. In other words, there's no consequence. There's no reading. There's no reasoning for this. There's no meaning behind this. It's all meaningless, ultimately.
There's no
Torah.
cause and effect.
There's no cause and effect. Well stated. There's no cause and effect. It's not like if I push that button, that's going to happen. I could hit the button from today. You know, now I heard. Years later, I heard that when you go in an elevator and you press the door close button, oftentimes elevators, though, they don't mean anything.
No.
That's what I heard. It's just there as a placebo effect. It's like, oh, I hit it, and 5 seconds later it closed.
Same thing.
Guess
with
what?
Same thing with traffic lights on the corner.
That's what I heard also. I heard that recently. I don't think all of them,
Same
some
thing
of
with
them.
our government in Washington.
All right. Hold on. Slow it down. Huh?
Request your spouses.
Now, here's the deal. These 2 students believe that what their teacher was saying is that there's no purpose, there's no meaning, there's no cause and effect, there are no consequences, right? There's no absolute reason why I should or shouldn't do this particular action or not that particular action. It doesn't mean anything. So what did they say? Nihilism, right? What is nihilism? Nihilism doesn't mean anything.
Everything evaporates.
Nothing means anything. There's no meaning. Spiritual nihilism, I'm going to sound like a Wikipedia page where I look this up, is a neo-Buddhist philosophy that says it's the belief that true peace arrives to a person when they arrive at the conclusion that nothing has meaning. Nothing actually has meaning. This is what Tzadok and Baitus, the two of the students of Shimon, of Antignos, this is what they believe their teacher was teaching.
When he correct them.
Oh, hold on. Good. The man has
Before
to.
they became Sadducees.
Oh,
which is
but hold on.
another story
You
onto itself.
read ahead. All right, hold on. So now that
I
the
did?
cat's out of the bag, let's read Rambam, Maimonides, on this. Okay, it's in your sheet.
I was just at his grave.
Right.
And Tiberia.
Mhm.
Nice.
Mhm.
All right, origins of nihilism. Here we go. Antignos. You guys ready for this? All right, here we go. Origin of nihilism. Antignos, who we just quoted before, had 2 students of 2 of his students, Tzadok and Baitos. When they heard Antignos make this declaration, the one that we just quoted, They left him and said to each other, behold, the teacher said explicitly that there is no reward and punishment for a person. There is no hope at all. They misunderstood his intention. Remember, Antignos, what was his intention? He was just saying that if you're serving God, don't do it for what you're going to get out of it. Do it because you're serving God. It's the right thing, right? Serve for the right. Do good for the sake of good. Not about the reward. That's what he was teaching.
And there's apparently a reward, because he said, if you serve it for a reward, that's the worst way to do it. So obviously there isn't.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent. Right. From his words, you can imply that he's not saying there's no reward. He's saying there is a reward, but don't do it for the reward. The reward is a consequence that's going to happen anyway. Of course, you're going to get a reward. Of course, no good. No, that's cynical. Of course, no good goes unrewarded. Of course. The question is, should that be the motivation? We're going to get back to that. But again, Sadok and Baitus, they misunderstood. Let's continue. Again, this is Rambam, Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah, the great Maimonides. Second paragraph, last paragraph on the page. With mutual encouragement, in other words, they encouraged themselves. They left the group of their teacher and abandoned the Torah. Each created their own group, called by the sages either Sadokim for Tzadok, right, named after the man Tzadok, the student Tzadok, Sadokim, Sadducees in English, or Baitosim for Baitos, Baitusim, Bothusians. All right, those are the English terms of those Hebrew names. Now, these two groups, they struggled to gather followers as they outright denied Torah. They basically said, Torah, what's the point? Do whatever you want. It doesn't mean anything. Nothing means anything. There's no point, right? We live and then we die and there's no reward. There's no consequence. That's it. Do whatever you want. Yeah.
Isn't it the one that just said that the Torah Shabbat is not to be followed and only the Torah?
He's about to explain that.
They did believe in the Torah.
What? No, they didn't.
They came back to it.
They didn't. Look, he's about to explain what happened. Look what he says. They struggled to gather followers as they outright denied Torah. So what did they do? They tried another tactic. So they tried another approach. They claimed to believe in Torah, but denied the traditional received oral interpretation. It was a strategy. We know, right? We know that the Tzedukim, Baitusim, that they believed in Torah, but they denied the oral tradition. According to Rambam, they didn't really believe in Torah. They only said that to give legitimacy for what they're up. You with me?
Yeah,
They want,
Bait and switch.
total bait and switch.
Like a typical breakaway.
Where they're promising one thing, but really another thing. Correct. Or like any revolution. Or whatever.
No, don't say that. Don't say that
Power.
word here.
Power to the people, right? Power to the people, but really it's about whoever wants to be in charge.
But wasn't there a tie-in to the Sadducees, to the Dead Sea Scrolls, or to Masada?
So there is a time. Yeah,
Okay,
which
thought so.
we'll get there soon. So they tried another approach. They claimed to believe in Torah, but denied the traditional received oral interpretation. Again, third sentence, third line on that page, on the second page. Their intention was to discharge themselves from the accepted obligations, ordinances, and decrees. They were thus able to say that they believed in Torah, just not the tradition. This gave them license to choose their own interpretation and be lenient in certain areas and stringent in others, all according to their own whims and desires. Basically, what they wanted to do is throw off the entire Torah. Judaism, blow it up, obsolete, right? Irrelevant. But they realized that no one was going to follow that approach. Which Jew is going to follow that? Which Jew is going to say, "Oh yeah, let's follow something that's not Torah"? That's crazy. No one's going to follow that.
Especially since they were not so far from the giving of it.
Well, I mean, it's this would have been. It would be 1,000 years later. It's not-
Thousands? A couple of hundred.
No, this is later. This is Second Temple era. So this is probably between 800 and 1,000 years after Sinai. But either way, the point is that at that point, Jews knew what was legit, what was real, and what wasn't. They weren't going to get any followers to say, "Oh yeah, Torah." It's very woman. Torah is like the whole thing is obsolete. So they modified it. They said, no, we believe in Torah, but not the oral tradition. That gave them license to reinterpret whatever they want. Once you say that we don't believe in tradition, right? Once you say that, once you blow up the tradition part of it, so then what's left? Words on the page that anyone can interpret. And guess what? At that point, you might as well have started your own religion, because you can literally take the words and make it whatever you want. So they did away with tradition. So they got the ends that they wanted, which is to create their own movement that's not Judaism, but they couch it in, oh, no, we're actually more authentic because we're going back to the original source. We're the original text. Oh, you guys have your rabbinic interpretation, which meanwhile was the received tradition all the way back from Moses. As Pirkei Avot testifies, it was all an unbroken chain. But meanwhile, they positioned, Tzadok and Baitus, they positioned it as, oh, you don't want to go by whatever these guys made up. Let's go back to the original text. And if you want to know what it means, well, ask us. We'll make it up. You see what they did?
Sit in darkness on Shabbos?
Yes. It says on Shabbat not to light a fire. So what they do, they sat in darkness. No fire. The rabbi said, doesn't say you can't have a fire. It says you can't light a fire, but you can leave it a pre-existing flame on, right? You can leave the lights on, like Motel 6 might have said at some point in a commercial. We'll leave the lights on for you. You can leave a fire on. You can leave food that's been cooking. You can leave it on the fire. That's how we have hot food. Put it in a crock pot Friday afternoon. Shabbat lunch. You have ridiculous. That's why, by the way, that's why we make sure to have a cholent Shabbos by lunch. Why do we make sure to have hot food? To declare that these guys were wrong and they corrupted Judaism. Let's continue. Let's read this inside. We're going to get back to more ideas. It's important to emphasize just how severe this split was. Let's continue. Final paragraph from Rambam, from Maimonides. Thus, and I don't have to mention who Maimonides are. We know the physician, philosopher, scholar, great Jewish leader who lived in the 1100s. I mean, Maimonides, he knows the score. Let's continue. Thus emerged these evil groups, the Sadducees and Boethusians. He calls them evil, who are called Karaites here in Egypt. Remember, Maimonides was the royal physician of the, I don't know, what do they call it? The king of Egypt? I don't know if they had a pharaoh. No, I don't think they had a pharaoh then. No, it wasn't pharaoh then. Whatever, the leader, whatever they call the leader then. So he says in Egypt, we call this splinter group the Karaites. So now you have 3 names. Sadducees, Boethusians, and Karaites. Either way, whatever you call them, it's the same energy. They are the ones that began to question the accepted transmission of Torah and to explain all the verses as they saw fit without listening to the sages at all. And this runs contrary to what God Almighty states in his Torah in Deuteronomy. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announced to you, either to the right or to the left, where basically in the written Torah itself, it says that if you want to know what this text means, follow the tradition. Don't come up with your own interpretations. Anyone can open up the Bible and say, and read it. There's a book by an author, A.J. Jacobs. You guys know A.J. Jacobs? He wrote for the New York Times. He did I call him a stunt writer. I don't mean that negatively, but like he's a guy that does like crazy things and then writes a book about it. It's like he read through the entire encyclopedia and then wrote a book about his experience. Like he'll do like extreme things and then he has content for a book. So he wrote a book called My Year of Living Biblically. You read that book? He's also a humorist, so it's very funny. So he writes, yeah, it's cute. Yeah, it's cute. Whatever. So he writes that for 1 year, he decided to live based on the Old Testament. By the way, he's Jewish, but he's living not by Torah, not by Jew. Wasn't living
Not
Jewish.
by tradition.
Right. He was not living Jewish. He was living biblical. So he writes that he's in Central Park and sitting next to somebody in a bench. And the guy tells him about that he's having an affair, whatever it is. So he picks up a stone and throws it at him. Because the Bible says that you stone something. And then he said he had to run away because I think it was a little pebble. I don't think it was a big boulder. But he writes, again, this is what he wrote in the book. What happened, actually, I wasn't there. But he also writes that he came to the command. I think he went through kind of from the beginning. He got up to the commandment where it says to wear tzitzis. You know, you have a 4-corner garment, you wear like the fringes on the corners, whatever. So he's like, all right. So I took strings and I pinned it to my 4-corner garment, pinned it to my shirt. I'm thinking, I'm reading it. I'm like, why are you creating your own method? There's literally, it's built in. And then I think when he got to tefillin, you know, the black boxes. So like when you, what you read it, and you shall place them as a sign on your between your eyes and
It doesn't say anything about them being black boxes.
so you can't, it's not actionable because it doesn't, the words don't lend itself to any meaning or understanding of what it is. So at that point he turned to a rabbi, and I think he met a Chabad rabbi actually, and he helped him with tefillin, with the legit film. But I recalled as I was reading that book, I was thinking that here you have a guy who's really demonstrating how insufficient or ineffective it is to just read from the written Torah. And because it doesn't explain anything. It doesn't explain what any of these things are, which means that if you want to be able to put them into action, you're going to need an interpretation. And if you need an interpretation, so then you have two choices. Either go by the one that we've always known. There's never been a different meaning of what tefillin is. I don't know of anyone around the world that has a different definition of tefillin. Everyone knows black boxes. That's what tefillin are. There's no other meaning of that. So for someone to come along and say, you know what, I'm gonna reinterpret the verses, going back to the original source, is just essentially, at that point, it's what are you doing? Like, why are you taking this and reinterpreting? And what makes your modern day interpretation that you just came up with, why is that any better than a timeless, right, age-old, tried and true approach to understanding what Torah is actually saying? Does that make sense?
But we've done that with Rabbi Tam. I mean, he said this is not the way that the film should be. And there are people who put on two sets.
Yeah. Well, they had a
No,
disagreement.
it was just a matter of the order of the
Right, the order of
parchment.
the-
I just read about that
Right.
fact, and it also ties into that 13th gate at the
the
base of
nusach, and yeah, look, so there are some nuances about, as to how exactly something should be done, but all of that is within the tradition. Somebody that comes completely outside the box and says, well, I think tefillin are
green boxes.
green boxes, or circle, I don't know, whatever. I can't even think that creatively at this point.
If you're just reading literally the
Correct.
interpretation,
Correct.
like an infant who's toddler who's watching a religion but not being taught.
Right.
So they're emulating, but they have no understanding.
There's no understanding. There's no context. Our Jewish belief is that Moses got not just the written Torah, but he got the explanations for everything. And he told us, and he handed down the document to us. He said, here's what is written. Here's what it means. And that's how it always was. We had the written text and the explanation, and eventually it got written down. So again, the core idea here is what led to these splinter groups. And by the way, one could argue, again, we have to look historically to see exactly the timeline of all this. But one could argue that the greatest shift, right, the shift from Judaism to other religions, right? Can I speak like, is that vague enough, right? How that splinters may be a similar idea where you're taking the core of something and you're branching off into a completely different, or into a different place. I believe the first time that happens is with the students of Antignos. That's the first Jewish splinter group that happens. And that becomes a great tragedy. And it all goes back to a misunderstanding of what? Of the statement, don't be like a servant who serves for the sake of reward, rather be as one who serves not for the sake of reward. And the students heard, there's no reward, there's no point, which means that Torah should be totally annulled. We can't get away with that. So we'll just say that we're going to reimagine it as we see fit.
Well,
Korach was the first split, but it didn't gain any traction. You're right. The Torah itself talks about Korach, who essentially did a similar thing. He said, who's Moses to tell us what God means? We're all holy.
What about leadership?
It was about leadership, correct. You're right. It might be the first split.
It's also was about politics and leadership. They don't
Correct.
have a keuna, the great keuna, and then that was their example.
You are correct.
One of the reasons that they disappeared is when the temple was destroyed and everybody was dispersed. They had no more claim for leadership because there was no leadership, so they disappeared.
Right.
But
Yeah.
why didn't this guy correct his students?
So getting back to that question.
I mean,
why
wouldn't it be
didn't
so
he-
hard for him to say, no, you misunderstood what they said?
They sat in the dark all Shabbos, can we conclude that they weren't so bright? Because they don't sound bright.
Well
They
done.
don't Sound bright,
Cold food and darkness.
yeah.
Happy Shabbat.
Actually,
Happy Shabbat for you.
they were very intense. They were very intense in what they did practice according to the Torah.
Again, very intense, but not accurate.
They wanted
Huh?
less mitzvah.
Look,
When I was in college, I took a class in Yiddish. The teacher was a rabbi, a reform rabbi, but he was very intently reform. Misguided, but I would say he was very religious when it came to his reform Judaism.
yeah,
Not much different.
okay, I hear you. But I think that Tzadok and Baitus were a little bit more devious in the sense, I don't know who you're talking about, but they were devious in the sense that their agenda was
To start something new.
to really undo the entire Torah, the
What's
entire
the
Judaism.
situation of the Karaites and the Sadducees now?
I believe there's a group in Israel.
Yeah, but what's?
Till this day, I believe there are groups in Israel to this day.
Do they still believe the same as?
I think they yeah,
They don't like anything on Shabbat, they sit in the bar, there is a group of them.
to this day. It's not a big group.
That's it?
Are they in the army?
I don't think so, I don't think they believe in the states, we are better than the state.
By the way, so speaking of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that was mentioned before, the Dead Sea Scrolls, many have posited that the Dead Sea sect, in other words, the people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls that were living there, that they might have been Karaites or Boethusians and Sadducees and whatever. There's different theories, and it's not a class on that, but that's one of the theories. But getting back to your other question about how come he didn't correct them, I think it's kind of like once they had that thought that that's what their teacher meant, then that kind of planted that seed in their head, and like, you know what? We actually don't believe in there being any purpose. We don't believe in that. And then even if the teacher said, well, I didn't mean that, at that point, they were off and running. And by the way, that's why I think, the breadcrumbs that the first two Mishnahs dropped. Number one, the first Mishnah talks about the chain of custody of Torah. That's the counter argument to Tzadok and Baitus, to the splinter group, to say, what, you're going to create your own understanding of Torah? We have from the beginning, we have clarity as to what everything means. But also what the men of the great assembly would say is be cautious in judgment, establish many pupils, and make a safety fence around the Torah. That's almost an indictment of Antignos, who said something that was misunderstood, right? And got out of control. It's like this conflagration that just, went out and really caused a lot of havoc and a lot of devastation. There's a famous story in I think it's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that one of the priests, maybe even the high priest, at some point was a Sadducee, one of these guys that didn't believe in the oral tradition. And when it came to pouring the water on the altar on the festival of Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot,
The water libation.
So one holiday a year, instead of pouring wine on the altar, they would pour, in addition to pouring wine on the altar, they would add a water pouring. They would pour some water. But it's never stated clearly in the Torah. It's alluded to, and our tradition is that is what we do on Sukkot. But this Sadducee priest or high priest, was it a high priest or a regular priest? It was a high priest. So that was at the point of corruption, right? That was already when the high priesthood was corrupt. So it was a Sadducee who was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, the Beit Kahuna. He did not want to pour water because it's not written in the Torah. It's not written in the 5 books themselves. It's of traditional rabbinic origin, or it's tradition. He didn't believe in tradition. So he poured it not on the altar, but he poured it on his own sandals or his own shoes.
Whoa.
So the entire assemblage, what did they do? They took their esrogim, the esrog,
They
right?
threw it out.
And they pelted him with esrogim.
The guy?
I'm not sure. And what happened was that caused bloodshed, because then Rome got involved, and it got very complicated. got very complicated because Rome had backed the corruption of the high priesthood, and then they didn't like that the Jews were pelting their guy with this. It was the whole thing was bananas or citrons, as it were. I think that's the English name for it. Okay, so you guys got that. So what's the whole point? The point of all this, first of all, is to know how Judaism at some point gets splintered and how. I mean, I think by and large, we're all on the same track, more or less, as to what tradition is and what it isn't. But there was a time, and there still is a time, and there still are those that are totally kind of moved away from tradition, and which again is not that you don't believe in tradition, but what it is wanting to make your own tradition. Which I don't know, is that any better than belief in a tradition? Making your own
Well, if you're
tradition,
the head of the religion,
right? So it works out for you. And
Scientology, he's making a lot of money.
you know, there's a Scientology thing right here,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
next
You
to the
don't
post
go
office,
anywhere.
right by the post office.
Right on,
Roswell.
It's been there forever.
Yeah,
Interested?
Well,
Yeah,
there's a sign.
it's a huge barcode. Interested?
Yeah, really.
Yeah, if
Oh,
you're
really?
interested, if you've got questions, stop in.
anyway,
Drop your money here.
yeah.
But-
By the victors.
So you're saying that
Who's not to say that these were the victors out of 1,000 years or however long, there had to be more than just Korah or whatever else. And that this lineage, the way it's written, was the victor of all of that.
I would agree with you, but I think the reason why it's the victor is because it's the most authentic. It's the one that it was the
You
mainstream.
forget about the other guy that came around. He also deviated a little bit. What was his initials?
He got
JC?
a lot of followers. But the
Yeah, a lot of
point of it is,
The victor.
Well, when something is written,
Are you referring to Rambam? You referring to?
I'm saying this lineage.
tradition. Who,
Our lineage?
Yes.
Or their lineage?
Because we're the
So
victors?
started with, the forefathers and so forth and to Moses, but I'm sure there were people in that 1,000 years before you got to writing this down, oral tradition, that there were many other kinds of postulations of what
people may have opted out, right?
But as I said, history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
You don't know what the real facts are back then, but you know it because this person wrote it.
Right. So I think what's important is that we know all the names. All of the names are documented. And so we know that this was this was mainstream tradition, and it's been the tradition all the way through. It's one could say that the fact that it's not documented, it doesn't preclude the fact that there were those like you're saying. And yet, if there's no documentation, what we know is what we know, and what we have is this tradition. But we do know of those that try to break away and those that did break away. And nonetheless, this is the core tradition. All of this is to really highlight the main point of today's conversation, which is that it's not that there is no reward and consequence, but it's that our motivation should not be for the reward and consequence. It's kind of like the way Maimonides, the very same Maimonides, says, teaching children right and wrong. So when it comes to a young child, typically you want to use incentives, right? So it's cute how Rambam writes it. Maimonides, he says, for kids, you give, I think he says like nuts, and I don't think they had candy then. I don't think anyone was making candy.
It's
like-
like.
Base also. He's like
Raisins.
He's like, I don't think it says raisins. He says you give them nuts or you give them other things like that to get them encouraged to do the right thing. But then as they get older, they don't need that anymore, because the goal of education is to really teach that goodness is good because it's good. It's almost like the statement of our sages. I forget exactly where it comes from. Maybe it comes from also Pirkei Avot. Maybe schar mitzvah mitzvah. Is that Pirkei Avot? I don't know where that's from. Schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah. And there are many different ways to interpret that, but one simple way of saying it is that the reward of goodness is goodness. I once heard from a rabbi who was meeting with somebody, and she was saying that, she's invested 30 years in her marriage. And what does she have for it? So he says, so I told her, I said, what do you have for it? You invested 30 years in marriage. What else do you want? You invested, that's what you have. You did good, you have good. What else do you want?
What are you looking for?
What are you looking for? You got what you got. So when it comes to a mitzvah, what's the ultimate reward of a mitzvah? Really, the ultimate reward of a mitzvah is the goodness, right? It's the beauty, it's the goodness that's created by the mitzvah. Now, do we believe that there's also reward? Absolutely, we believe that. But that's not the motivation, or at least, again, that not ideally be the motivation. Now, we are human beings. So as human beings, we do sometimes need motivation. Let's call it extrinsic motivation. Like motivation, like I did this, I get that. Like that's actually that's not outside the pale of how human beings work. That makes sense the way human beings work, because sometimes we need a little bit of extra motivation to do things. And that's why it says in the Talmud that if I forget how the Hebrew goes, but it says, la'olam, I'm forgetting the rest of the phrase. A person should always do the right thing. Is it study Torah, do the mitzvah, whatever. Shalol lishma, not for the ideal, not for the right reason, because mitoch shalol lishma ba lishma. If you do it for not the most altruistic reason, eventually you're going to do it for the altruistic reason. In other words, even if you're doing it for a side reason, you're doing good because you want something else, right? And you're not that motivated by the goodness itself. Ultimately, still do that. Do it even for not the most purest reasons, because ultimately you'll come to do it for the pure reason, which means that we should not beat ourselves up by the fact that sometimes we're not perfectly altruistic. You know what? We're not angels. We're not malachim. So the fact that we sometimes want, the side benefit makes sense. We're human beings. Human beings want also a little bit of, give me some, I don't know how would you say it? Give me some reward, give me some feedback, right? That's good. But at the end of the day, it's also about, ultimately, it's about the appreciation that the good is good. And so that leads directly into what we're going to study today inside, which talks about a deep form of service of God, which is not about self and reward, but it's about the one whom we are serving. And that's what we're going to go to. Does everyone have a copy? Did everyone get one? All right. It's the, it would be the page marked 58, but it looks like the page number is not present, but it's right there. You'll see it. And I'm going to pull it up online. But first, I want to mention two things. The difference between doing something for ulterior motives or doing something, let's focus on the exact example here. The difference between serving God for ulterior motives or serving God because that's what I'm, because God asked me to, or God told me to, so I'm doing it. There's two differences. One difference is who you're serving, right? If I'm serving God for ulterior motives, then who am I really serving? Or who might I be serving? Myself. I'm doing it because of what I get out of it. So therefore, there's self-interest. Therefore, one could say that you're not really doing it for God, you're doing it for yourself. The second, yeah.
Even like in the Hayam Shema Tishmeu, second verse of Shema, God basically tells us if you do this, you get this. And there is like
Reward and punishment. Absolutely.
Why if we do that for the reward, we're not doing it for God? I mean, God himself says to us.
So there's two ways to answer it. Number one, either the Shema that talks about reward and punishment and other mitzvot that mention reward and punishment, like honor your 10 commandments, honor your parents so that you'll live long. What it says. So there's two possible answers. There's more, but I'll share with you two. One is, and these are classic explanations. One is that the Torah is speaking to someone who's not yet ready for the message. Do it because I told you to, or do it because it's the right thing to do. Don't worry about that. They're not spiritually, emotionally ready for that message. So you're appealing to that,
The humanity?
the humanity of it is like, well, tell me what I get. What do I get? Well, like, if I do this, what do I get? So the person that needs that message. Second point is that the Torah is not saying that you should do it for the reward. The Torah is just letting us know that if you do goodness, goodness will come to you as well. That will happen. As far as what your motivation should be pure. Ideally, right? The motivation ideally should be pure. It's like, again, just using the marriage relationship. In a relationship, in a marriage, so the goal is to do and to give to the other. The goal is to be there for the other.
Now you tell me this.
So, one second. So the goal is to be there for the other. So then the question is, okay, but what do I get? One second. Time out. You should be there for them. As far as what you're also going to get, they're also going to be there for you. But then that shouldn't necessarily be why you're doing it and what you're doing it for. It still should be about you doing what you're called upon to do, what your end of the deal. Anyway, so those are two responses. Either it's appealing to the lower, I don't know what to call it, to the lower self that needs a little bit of motivation, like needs, okay, sure, I'll do it, but like, what do I get? The second explanation is it's not intended to be the motivation. It's intended to let us know that doing good will always,
Reward you.
yeah, conjure goodness. Goodness begets goodness. It's always going to happen. It's almost like it's the spiritual law of the universe. Is that, to use like a modern term, good karma begets good karma. It's like, right, like good deeds beget goodness.
But it's not.
Negativity begets negativity. But it's not saying as a reward and punishment, but as a natural consequence of the universe. It's kind of like, that's what's going to happen. As to why you're doing it, that's not why you should do it. FYI, that's the way the world is programmed, right? If you touch fire and you get burned, is that a punishment? It's not a punishment. It's the nature of the universe. Doing a mitzvah will always bring blessing, whether or not we're aware of it in this, in this current station that we're in, where we have very limited spiritual view. Is it going to bring goodness? Absolutely. Why should we do it? Oh, for sure, if you do good for someone else, it's good for someone else. It's without even question, right? As to what it feels like for us, either we'll feel it or we won't feel it. We'll know or we won't know. That's based on a whole host of factors. But the bottom line is, either way, that might not necessarily be the reason why we should do it. Okay, so now with all that in mind, so that's one point. So one point is, I had 2 points. One point is, who are you doing it for? Either yourself, reward, or you're doing it for God. The second distinction is how you do what you do, how you do the work. If you're doing it for yourself, you'll only do as much as you feel excited about doing. If you're doing it for God, not about self, then you'll do as much as God has asked. So that's about going beyond your natural limitations. So now let's jump inside. And, Sochi, Russia, right? Not Socho. Okay, good. Natan, good. Thank you. I didn't see that until now. Okay, let's do this. We have a few minutes. Let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen once again, and let's pull up. Wow, can I even find? This? Yes, I can. Okay, serving with a yoke. The left side is cut off. You guys see that? Serving with a yoke? Yes? Yeah? You guys got it? All right.
Also called shell shaker.
Such a servant, breakfast reference. Such a servant. In other words, the one who serves God for God's sake and not for their own sake. Such a servant is called an Oved Elokim, one who serves God with a heavy yoke, meaning that his entire worship goes beyond his natural inclination and habit, again, because it's not about him, it's about God. Therefore, he or she, it's not gender specific, he or she is ready, willing, and able to go beyond their own natural, what feels comfortable, what feels good, to do it for God. For example, and he now gives 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 examples. One is about Torah study, one is about tzedakah, and one is about suppressing negative emotions. Let's jump in. We'll go as far as we can get to today. For example, in the realm of toiling and Torah study, let's say a person accepts upon himself to read and review 1 chapter, which means 1 section of Torah. But if this amount of study is not more than what he is used to, and what his inclination dictates, since he naturally loves to study constantly, his study is not considered serving with the yoke at all. In other words, let me just jump in for a second with a little commentary. If by nature you're an academic and you like studying, so you study as much as you're comfortable with. Here's the question. Are you serving God with your Torah study? You're doing it because you like it. By the way, that's not bad. But what he's suggesting is to push yourself a little bit beyond your comfort zone, to push yourself a little bit outside what you're comfortable doing, which evokes and brings out that I'm doing it for Hashem. I'm not doing it for myself. Brackets now. He is considered to be serving with a yoke. In other words, doing it for God, only if he studies more than his nature and habit, laboriously and with great toil, to the point of actual exhaustion of the soul. He says, study until you're tired, until you're actually tired. Torah study until you fall asleep. You know the joke? Love this joke. They say that there was a rabbi in an old town in Eastern Europe, back in the day, shtetl, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and he goes down to the kitchen and he sees
He goes down to the kitchen.
He goes, oh,
Fancy house in the shtetl.
all right, that's actually very true.
Somebody's living in Sandy Springs too long.
Who's going down to the kitchen, right? Good point. So he walks to the kitchen. Yeah. Maybe he was sleeping in the kitchen. I'm kidding. So he goes to the kitchen. And right. No, he goes to the kitchen and he sees like the housekeeper, the Polish housekeeper, not Jewish. She's sitting there at the kitchen table with a copy of the Talmud. She can't read Hebrew. He's like, what are you doing with this? She says, every time I see, she's like, I couldn't fall asleep. And every time you open this book, you fall asleep. So I figured there's something about this book that makes you fall asleep. Boom.
The father is always.
Is always sleeping over the Talmud. That's funny. I need to watch a little shtisel.
Shtisel.
Shtisel. Oh, wow. That's tongue. All right, so let's continue. So the point of studying Torah is to push yourself a little bit more. Again, let's understand what he's saying. What he's saying is it's not extreme. What he's saying is simply this. If we're serving God, let's push ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone. Let's continue. Our sages homiletically interpreted the verse, if a man dies in a tent, to mean in the tent of Torah. Okay, this is not meant to be literally. Trust me. He kills himself for Torah. I don't know. We use somebody did well. You're like, oh, you killed it. Right? Somebody goes on stage, break a leg. We don't actually mean these things. It's an expression of saying, go above and beyond. Like really give it your all. That's what it means. It means when we study Torah, give it your all. This is called toiling in Torah study, and this is the meaning of the yoke of Torah. Hence, on the verse, this is fantastic. Look at this. Look at this last paragraph on 58 or the page, not 58. Hence, on the verse, and you shall return and discern between one who serves Elohim and one who does not serve him. Our sages explain one who reviews his study 100 times cannot be compared to one who reviews 101 times. In other words, you can't compare the 100 to the 101. Why? Here we go. Let's continue. For the one time that goes beyond his habit and nature, he gains the title one who serves Elohim with the yoke of Torah. By contrast, when he studies only 100 times, even though he reviews his study with hard work and great exertion, page 60, he is not called one who serves God. This is because he has a natural desire to be diligent and review his studies up to 100 times, for such is his nature and habit. But with that one review in which he goes beyond his natural inclination and which goes very much against his desire and which is very difficult for him, he is called an Oved Elokim with a complete yoke, one who serves God. This is, by the way, in my opinion, a very powerful example. And obviously I need to give a little bit of background. In the times of the Talmud, they would review each teaching 100 times. That was the normal protocol. What he's suggesting here is that if you study it, and it's from the Talmud itself, if you study 101 times, it's qualitatively different. It's not just one more time. It now moves it from your comfort zone to being out of your comfort zone. And I love this example because going outside of your comfort zone doesn't mean you do it 1,000 times. One more time. Push yourself a little bit. It's not the quantity of pushing outside the box, it's the quality. Did you go outside your comfort zone? It doesn't matter how far outside your comfort zone, a little bit outside your comfort zone. And now you are in divine territory. Now you're not doing it for self. Because if it's all about you and your comfort zone, you would have only done it 100 times. You did it 101 times, that's the one time for God. And that changes the entire situation.
When you read a book and you reread it, you see something you didn't see before.
Correct.
Same thing with like television show, where you see some elements from the first show.
Right. This is, I think though, however, that being said, which is correct, I think this is less about what you gain from that extra time to the fact that studying it 101 times means that now you're experiencing the mitzvah, because Torah study is a mitzvah. You're doing the mitzvah of Torah study not because you enjoy it or because you're getting, but it's because it's the mitzvah. Let's continue. Let's go. I know we're like 3 minutes past. Let's go another 2 minutes. We'll go very quickly through another few things. Because it's all the same topic, but I just want to move through it. And so it is with other mitzvot, such as the mitzvah of tzedakah, giving to the needy. So again, in that example, it's about going a little bit beyond. He acts contrary to his nature and desire. He may be miserly and tight-fisted, since by nature his money is more precious to him than his own body and soul. He expends for his own household needs only with great frugality, no more than what is needed to supply his needs, etc. So he's describing a person who's very budget conscious. But when it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah, to sustain the poor, he is capable of distributing money in a manner that far exceeds his natural inclination. Again, this is an example of someone who does a mitzvah beyond their own natural proclivities. This is because, next paragraph, of the Ol Malchut Shemayim, the yoke of heaven that is upon him, and by which he is called an Oved Elokim, one who serves God, since he suppresses his nature and the energy of the toil of his hands, for which he gave his life and gives it to the poor, etc. In other words, a person worked hard for the money, and for the person to take that hard-earned resources and give it away is a tremendous sacrifice, as it were. And that's a mitzvah. And he says, by doing so, one is serving God. And his motivation to do so is only to fulfill the will of God, since he is afraid to rebel against his master and fear of God is upon him. But one who distributes only according to his nature and the generosity of his heart, and no more is not called one who serves God with a yoke, suppressing his nature and habit, etc. Again, it's the same thing as the 100 and the 101. If you're studying Torah 100 times, great, but you didn't get outside of the box. If you're giving what you normally give, what you're comfortable giving, great, mitzvah. But it's not going above and beyond. It's not the serving God. That's giving an extra dollar, an extra whatever that is, the extra little bit.
May I jump in with the attitude on tzedakah?
You know what? Let's finish one more and then we'll close it up. Suppressing negative emotions. All right, we're gonna do a little bit more. And so it is with all the emotions. So we talked about Torah going above and beyond, tzedakah going above and beyond, and now it's talking about our internal disposition. He restrains his spirit and rules over his evil and harsh nature, and he does so against his will only because of his Kabbalah Ol Malchut Shemayim, the yoke of heaven, such as one who controls his spirit and does not fume with harsh anger. Imagine somebody who by nature is angry, but someone who controls that because of God. God says, don't get angry, right? You're not supposed to get angry, so he controls himself. He does not take revenge from or bear a grudge against his fellow, nor does he think negatively of another person or consider doing any harm to them, God forbid. He does not speak ill of another or gossip, nor does he engage in empty frivolity. He does all of this, even though it contradicts his own 62 nature, which is to be a joker and a gossiper. Of that line. Joker, well, that's the translation. All right. He does so only because the Ol Malchut Shemayim, the yoke of heaven, is upon him as a heavy yoke, causing him to forsake and suppress his natural desire. And so it is with all the desires, such a desire to eat, the desire for carnal pleasure, for acquiring wealth and honor, the desire to win. By the way, that's a very important one, right? So I have to win always. Although there is no prohibition against these things, which when done in accordance with Jewish law, the Oved Elokim, the servant of God, will restrain himself and control his spirit, denying himself all of these in a manner that exceeds his strength and nature. Even if his nature is to pursue honor, wealth, and glory, he makes do with little and accepts everything that is done to him against his will, such as hearing himself being shamed and cursed and not responding. The way they refer to that in other circles is turning the other cheek, right? That's what he's talking about. And he behaves similarly with all his natural tendencies. He does all this with great toil and with a sense of having a very great yoke, motivated only by the Ol Malchut Shemayim that is upon him, the yoke of heaven that is upon him. And his primary labor and work is to do that which is against his nature, even to refrain from making minor remarks. Similarly, he refrains from entertaining foreign thoughts, right? Distracting thoughts. Similarly, he refrains from behaving me see how far this goes. Okay, 2 more paragraphs, then we're closing it out. Similarly, refrains from behaving lightheadedly. If by nature he is lighthearted and playful, he will force himself to be serious. He will speak little, guarding his mouth and tongue. He will not go about loudly and boisterously with an upright posture and confident spirit, making bold statements. Rather, he goes about subdued, self-effacing, and with great humility, even though by nature he has a confident spirit and uninhibited heart. By the way, uninhibited heart. He's not saying to be an unhealthy person. He's not saying that. He's saying to go a little bit above and beyond, be a little bit more of a mensch, because you're standing before God and you're serving God. And although his nature in all these matters is not transformed at all, he merely suppresses his heart and restrains his spirit and controls his inclination against his will, all of which is called only suppressing the sitra achra, not transforming it. There is great pleasure from this on high, as written in Tanya, chapter 27. There are 2 types of pleasure before him on high. The second one being when the sitra achra is suppressed while it is still strong and lifting itself like an eagle, and from there God brings it down, etc. This occurs through the suppression of the sitra achra below within all the servant's natural faculties, as mentioned above. The sitra achra is then suppressed on high, causing great pleasure on high. This is so especially when the servant does all this because of the Ol Malchut Shemaim, the yoke of heaven is upon him, as explained above, and he is thus called a true Oved Elokim, a true servant of God. Now, I need to say to mention this. I went through this especially the last few paragraphs, very quickly. Next week, we're going to pick up with chapter 27 of Tanya, where he speaks about 2 types of pleasure. And we're really going to get, he's going to use an example. In Tanya, he used an example of different types of food. Talks about food, there's sweet food and spicy food. And we're going to get into this culinary distinction, how you have, some foods are sweet, some foods are spicy, 2 different tastes. And we have this idea of transformation and suppression of negativity, and how both are valuable, but the advantage of suppression over transformation, even though it seems counterintuitive. All of that we'll address next week. But I want to make sure that we have very clear, at least what my intention was to convey today, which I think is very powerful, and I think can be actionable this week, which is always good if we can put into action what we study here on Sunday mornings. So we started off with the excerpt from Pirkei Avot. I'm just recapping what we did today. We started off with his teaching, right? We talked about the lineage, the tradition of transmission of Torah. We spoke about Antignos, who teaches that one should not serve God for the reward, how that was misconstrued by his students, 2 of his students, whether or not they were really whether or not they really misunderstood, or whether they wanted to misunderstand, and that's why they misunderstood. Tzadok and Baitos were the ones that said, well, there's no reward, there's no consequence, there are no consequences, there's no purpose in all of this. Torah, really, everyone should just do whatever they want, just do whatever you want, carte blanche, whatever. They realized they couldn't get away with that. So they instead made another version of Judaism, one in which they went back to the original Torah text, in which they could reinterpret, which means basically they could create whatever system among, right? Divorce of the tradition. And we talked about how that splintered off into something negative. But then ultimately we got to what was the point of all this. And the point of all this was to say that the intention of Antignos is not that there's no reward, but it's that reward is ultimately not the real reason for why we do what's right. Doing goodness is good for its own sake, right? Being a blessing to someone else's life, or being a blessing to God, as it were, being God's ambassador on this earth. That's valuable in and of itself. It's not just that I'm going to be God's ambassador of light, love, and goodness because I get no. Well, now joy's fine. No, I was even thinking I don't know, like a slice of pizza Thursday night at the Shoal Pizza situation. I'm doing it for that. I'm not doing it for that. Do it because it's good. We are human beings, and therefore human beings, so we sometimes need motivation. But Antignos was teaching his students that motivation is overrated. In other words, extrinsic motivation is overrated. Do it for the right thing. Again, that was misconstrued. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't also appreciate the reward, but that we should also have an appreciation for goodness for the sake of goodness itself. And he says, and our text, again, just to connect with our text says that if we approach life through those lenses, then what it means is that when we're faced with the opportunity to do a mitzvah, our mindset is not, well, if I'm about to do this mitzvah, so what do I get from this mitzvah? Because again, that means that we're serving ourselves, and that means we're only going to do as much as it benefits us. Whereas if we're doing it for God, for the pure reason, then we're serving God, number one. And number two, we're ready to go beyond our own comfort zone. It's not about how I feel about it. It's about what God wants. If I'm really God's ambassador on earth, then you know what? It's not about the vanity plate and the ability to speed at night without getting pulled over. I'm kidding. Those are like the ambassadors or whatever, right? It's not about, it's not about that. It's not about what I get. It's about what I have the opportunity to do. And that transforms Torah study experience. I'm learning more. Tzedakah giving, it transforms personal midos, personal midot, personal ethics and character traits, where I'm willing to suppress, I'm able to suppress my own natural emotions simply because that's the way God wants me to be. God wants me to be a mensch. I'm going to show up like a mensch in this situation. The person bugs me, whatever. I'm a mensch. I'm going to go beyond myself. That's the message. And so this week, I think the message is, the message speaks for itself. I think this week, if each of us can think about in our own lives, areas that we can push ourselves a little bit beyond. If we weren't doing it for our own benefit and or comfort, what would we do? Think about it in a relationship. If you're in a relationship with somebody, if I wasn't thinking about myself in this moment, and if I was just thinking about them, how would I show up in the situation? How would I smile to them? How would I give to them in this moment if I wasn't thinking about what I get from it? And then try that out. One moment this week. When it comes to a mitzvah, pick any mitzvah you want, whether it's prayer, davening, tefillin,
Not Kabbalah Yisrael.
whatever it is, whatever mitzvah it is. In that one mitzvah, do it for God, do it for Hashem, and see how it feels to do it not just for yourself, but do it for the right reason. Maybe your child, have a conversation with your child, not thinking about what you're getting from it, but to be there for them, right? I'll just speak I know it's late, but I feel like I should share this. It's a personal thing. Sometimes my kids I have a few kids away in yeshiva. Sometimes they call late at night. Why Chicago time zones, post Fabringen, I don't know, whatever. No, they're not slurring anything. No, I'm slurring my words because I'm exhausted. And sometimes I have to remember that it's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about how tired I am or not am, right? I'm running from a class and it's about being there for them. I'm not patting myself. I'm sharing a space, a human space where I think this can show up, where there's two options. You can either think about how you feel in this moment, right? Or you have questions like, how are you doing? How's school going? What are you learning? But it's, how are you doing, right? How are you doing? Do you have everything you need, right? Can I send something? Can I Instacart something? Like, do you need a snack? Do you need some seltzer? The answer is always yes. For seltzer, always yes. But it's about being there for the other. Oh my gosh. At this point, no. No, it's funny because this just happened Friday. One kid needed Tide, pods and a towel, whatever.
Can't believe they're still eating those things.
Hey, listen, that's good that he's doing laundry.
Yes. No, but again, it's
That's
just
the takeaway.
so again, I don't want to lose the plot. So again, the point is either in any interaction, whether it's spiritual, interpersonal, I could think about myself or the other. Hopefully the inspiration is to think a little bit about the other, about what we're here for, and then we can make a difference. All right, thank you very much for joining me for Kabbalah Café. It's great to see you all. Quick announcements. I think we're good. All right, thank you all for joining. Dr. Maxie, Sarah,
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Frank, Alex, good to see you. Caroline, is that Caroline from St. Simon's?
Okay, ready to go? Oh, sure.
Nice. Natan, great to see you guys. Shavua Tov, everyone. See you guys.